I have entirely too much styrofoam. Of course I could just get rid of it, but we all know that if I did that, then pollution would be my fault and mine alone, so that's out of the question. So I got thinking about, well, what can I do with all this styrofoam? So that's when I decided maybe I'll make a tiny little traffic barrier. So I'm going to show you how I did it. So I went through my styrofoam and I found a piece that I thought would work. Now, I'm not working in any kind of scale here, because in my experience working in a specific scale is a great way to get bored. So I'm just kind of eyeballing it. Once I found a good piece, I got my hot wire foam cutter and started cutting it into a concrete barrier kind of shape. Now, this kind of extruded polystyrene foam isn't really a great building material. It's pretty unforgiving and it doesn't cut that well, but it's extremely available and it would physically hurt me to get rid of it. Once I was happy with the shape, I sanded it as smooth as I could. Then I lathered it up in a mixture of gesso and PVA glue. Another tricky thing about this styrofoam with the loose kind of crumbly bead structure is that it can be kind of difficult to hide and cover up that styrofoam texture. But in some ways that can be kind of beneficial because it forces you to layer in a lot of texture. So while the gesso was still wet, I used a bit of sponge to stipple on some plaster of Paris, just the powder itself. I found this to be a pretty reliable way of getting a kind of bumpy concrete look. Once that was dry, I brushed it with another layer of PVA glue and then sprinkled on some tile grout. And this helped to cover up any bit of that styrofoam texture that was still showing through and gave it a more dilapidated look with a grainy kind of eroded texture. Once that dried, I covered it in gesso that I just colored gray with a little bit of black paint mixed in, and I did that just to seal it and prime it for the actual paint job. And then I stippled that a little bit just to get rid of any brush strokes that might have been showing through. So there it is. It's looking pretty good if you ask me. Then it was time for the paint, so I went over to the paint drawer, and I call it that because that's where I keep my paints. I got some ochres, some umbers, some siennas, and a Titan buff, which is one of my favorite paints to use because it's white, but like it's like a warmer white. It's a little bit more interesting than just plain white, which really, if you think about it, is pretty uncommon, except for like sheets and like, I don't know, photo shoots at the beach. And my ass. You know what I'm saying? Do you know what I'm saying? Do you know what I'm saying? How could you know? How could you possibly know what I'm saying? Now, you can see here there's actually two versions because the first one I made was too thin and flimsy, so then I just ended up using that one to kind of test out different techniques for the painting and the texturing and etc. So first I stippled on some of that Titan buff just to get a little variation in the texture and to lift the highlights a little bit. Then I hit it with a dark brown wash just to bring out the texture a little bit and kind of show me what I was really working with. You know, it's kind of hard to tell when it's super flat, but when you put the wash on, it brings out all the texture and you can actually get a sense of like, okay, this is what it looks like. Now, up until this point, I was just kind of going for it and not really thinking a ton about what the actual finished product was going to be. But once I was holding something that actually kind of resembled a concrete traffic barrier, I started thinking, okay, maybe this thing could use like a base or something. So that's what I got started on next. I got a piece of plywood and cut it to the same size as the barrier, but I extended it in about 1/2 centimeter in every direction. Then I used basically the same process I used for the barrier itself. I brushed on some tacky glue that I colored with a little bit of brown and then sprinkled on the plaster of Paris. Sprayed it with some water to activate the plaster, and then sprinkled on another layer of plaster of Paris to kind of soak up all the water that was left over. Kind of like a fried chicken style double coating. So then I stippled on some glue and then sprinkled on some tile grout. While that was drying, I got back to paint the actual barrier. Now, this is really where you can do kind of whatever the hell you want, but I was going for a more plain look here, so I just speckled on some darker grays and browns, dry brushed with some of that Titan buff. I hit the deeper cracks and crannies with a thick, dark wash to bring out the depth of it a little bit. I used black with just a little bit of brown in it to warm it up, and for the record, yeah, I only did the crannies, didn't do the nooks. That was very, very important. Don't do the nooks. That's stupid. Then back to the base, I mixed up a little bit of brown gesso, because this will be dirt. And I don't actually have like brown gesso, you just mix brown and gesso. And I coated the base in that. And I think that came out pretty good. Looks like dirt anyway. I mean, what else could it be? I don't know. So then I got a whole bunch of different paints, reds, greens, yellows, etc. and I mixed up a few different colors, and I got to work doing a whole bunch of stuff that it turned out I really didn't need to do. You see, I painted and textured the base basically to the center of that piece of plywood, just because it was easier to use bigger brushes and not have to worry about where the actual barrier was going to extend to. I guess that kind of made me forget how little of the base was actually going to be visible. So I thought I was being all cool and detailed and adding little bits of color to bring out like the different pebbles and rocks and stuff. But in the end, you couldn't really see most of them, but at least I got some practice. Then I finally attached the barrier to the base. I don't know why, but I tend to kind of put off steps like this. I leave things apart for as long as possible before I finally put them together. What can I say? I like a slow burn. I just drilled some holes into the base, and then I hot glued the barrier to the base. Comment if you think it's time for a new hot glue gun. Then I just took some dowels and brushed them with a little bit of tacky glue and pushed them up through the holes. Now, maybe this was overkill and I didn't really need to do it, but it's a miniature traffic barrier. I didn't need to be doing any of this. Lastly, it was time for the foliage, the flocking, the flora, little plants and grass and stuff and whatnot, you know. Now, this is the aspect of the project that I'm definitely the least experienced with. I've only done this kind of thing maybe once or twice before, but, you know, there's plenty of things I've only done once or twice, and that's never stopped me. What can I say? I like a slow burn. First, I'm cutting up some of this hemp twine, dabbing some little pieces of it into the glue, and sticking it in the crevasse between the barrier and the base. And I got my trusty bag of dead leaves. I got them at a place by my house called Woods, which is like a store, but it's nature and it's free. And I just kind of mash them up and sprinkle them around the base. Then I got some static grass, which I don't actually have the applicator for, so I'm just sort of raw dogging it. I got those at the hobby shop, which is like the Woods, but for tiny things, and it's not free. So I mixed in some of that static grass around the hemp rope, just to give it a little bit more color, you know, a little bit more life so it's not so arid and depressing. When you're making your miniature concrete traffic barrier, you can feel free to evoke any emotion from the infinite spectrum of feeling that is human experience. If you're having trouble deciding, just pick your favorite emoji. I went with this one. It's happy, but like a modest happy? Like it's not so worried about convincing everybody that it's happy. It's not overcompensating for anything, it's just allowing itself to experience joy. Not so much in spite of life's hardships, but like almost in concert with them. A kind of sturdy, like robust happiness that can thrive on its own. It doesn't need pain to exist, but it harmonizes with pain nonetheless. So that's why I put the grass, but again, you can do whatever emoji. You could do the cum one, or the butt one, or the farmer. Like, it's art. Like, you know, you could do whatever. And I got this bag of Spanish moss and glued a couple pieces in there. I don't know what makes the moss Spanish. Put this one piece growing out of the really deep crevice in the middle, and I really like it. I think it really ended up kind of tying the whole thing together, giving a kind of central detail to draw the eye. Then I got my pigment powders, which was just crushed up pastels, spritzed it with a little very watered down PVA glue, and brushed on some of the pigment powders just to age it a little bit more. Then lastly, I wanted to cover up the edge of the base. This was something I wasn't really thinking about a ton during the whole process, but then at the end I was like, oh shit, there's just a bunch of exposed plywood on the edge. I thought about doing a few different things, but I ended up just deciding to do basically the same thing I did for the top of the base, which, if you recall, is basically the same thing I did for the barrier itself. I ended up making this like way more complicated than I needed to, because I decided to use this sand here that someone had given to me. I think they got it from the dollar store. Not that that matters. I mean, it's sand. It's fucking sand. It's like, it's just sand. It was just important to me that I make it clear to you that I didn't buy this sand. I live like 2 miles from the beach, so I would never buy sand. But I had this sand, so I thought maybe I'll use that just to maybe give it a bit more variation in the texture so it didn't all look quite exactly the same. So I did, and it ended up being just way too shiny. So it took a few coats of paste to get rid of the sheen. And then the texture ended up being way too uniform. Like it looked like someone ran out of toilet paper, so they used a sugar cookie. It just looked like, I don't know, like sandpaper almost. If someone ran out of toilet paper and used sandpaper. I guess that would be better than using a sugar cookie, because at least it's paper. But it might hurt more than the cookie. So I ended up covering the whole thing in some texture paste that I made with gesso, PVA glue, paint, and coffee grinds. You know, it doesn't really matter a ton what happens here, because it's really just there to make the whole thing look more cohesive, and you don't want it pulling attention from any of the other details, the actual piece. Because it doesn't really exist in like the same logic as the rest of it. It's like, you know, the same way a frame doesn't really exist in the same logic of a painting. So you really could do anything. You could just, if I, you know, had maybe masked it or something, you could just leave the wood, you know, you could stain it or something, or you could just use like veneer but I wanted to kind of give it a little bit more texture and tie it into the whole thing a little bit more than it probably should have been, but that's what it did. F it. F you. F you. That's what it did. F you. Frick off. So, yeah, that is what we're working with here. In the end, I have to say I am pretty proud of it. I haven't done something really like this. You know, taking something like this, an object like that normally would be just like a small component of a larger piece most of the time, and putting all the attention on it, the humble traffic barrier. Yeah, I don't know. It looks like it's from like a post-apocalyptic, like a Mad Max type of thing. Or like people were like taking cover behind it because these all look like bullet holes, really. But that's, I mean, it's kind of cool that there's like a little bit of maybe mystique to it. Like, how did a traffic barrier get this f***ed up? But it was fun. I'm glad I did it. I encourage everyone to go and make a tiny little concrete traffic barrier. They have limitless uses. You could do just about anything with it. It's like a Leatherman, and yeah, you'll never run out. You'll never stop having fun with one of these. You hold it. You can hold it. You can take it on the bus. You can take it on the plane with you. A roller coaster, but maybe you would have to like kind of tether it yourself a little bit. You can give it to your kid, you could give it to your brother, you could give it to your mom, and they would love it. You could put it on the mantle, you could put it on a grave, you could give it as a gift. I said that already. You could donate it to the needy, you could donate it to the people who aren't needy. You could take it to the restaurant with you and say table for two, and then it's just you and this. Waitstaff might get a kick out of that, and something to talk about in the back of the house where the bear takes place. Yeah, really just non-stop fun and activities and stories, and you know, the best things are when you have a story to tell. So I don't know what I have no idea what I'm gonna do with this. I don't know where I'm gonna put it. I don't know. Guess I'll put it over there. Put it over here. It's really hot down here. It's kind of dusty too.